I've been in the decentralized system space for a long while. Like, this is what I've been doing most of my life: computer security, crypto, and also marketplaces. Actually, I've started a food delivery company before in Austria. So anyway, I wanted to go there because I had realized, hey, the tech is ready now. You can actually build a little bit more ambitious protocols. Like, this is, I think, a general theme for the Solana community, especially. The tech is ready. We're not, like, if tech is your biggest problem, I think you're missing the forest for the trees. The tech is ready now. We can build stuff.
Hey, Paul, good to have you here, man. Good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I've been working on for now, quite a while, like almost 2.5 years, really heavily been thinking about is marketplaces. Can you put marketplaces that essentially just serve the function of connecting a driver and a rider in the case of ride sharing, or a buyer and a seller, or just like two-sided, maybe three-sided marketplaces? Can you essentially find a way that is decentralized, not controlled by a single corporation, having a real market in the sense that supply and demand together set the price, meaning it's fairer to the buyer, it's fairer to the seller, it's fairer to the driver, it's fairer to the rider, because the middleman doesn't become so big. If you have this asymmetry, you have many different drivers, you have many different riders, but you only have one middleman, then of course all the power comes to that middleman, and that's how you end up with, sometimes it's like 60% that the ride sharing company takes now, while the driver does all the actual work. And that is insanity. I don't think they're doing anything wrong per se. I think unless, they lobby the government to keep out the competition. But I think the competition is coming. So I think everything is, in the short run, it sucks. But in the long run, in the case of markets, they have a way of finding a way. And I think we are that way to bringing decentralization to marketplaces anyway. So we're working on a decentralized ride sharing system, a ride sharing network. And we did a demonstration last year at the Solana Breakpoint conference, so pretty much a year ago. People could get rides, but as it is with these things, we didn't have everything we wanted. We actually gave those rides away for free, so the demand was very high. What we all kind of wanted to really demonstrate back then was a little bit of innovation in the market pricing dynamics, and we had some ideas back then around how that could work. I think my thoughts on this evolved a little bit more since then. I still think there's really interesting ways in which to improve and change and improve the product. But I think the core, from my view, is simply the take rate has become so high in rideshare, and also the wait times are so bad, and the utilization isn't even that good for the drivers. And I can get into these different parts, right? Because there's 3 parts here. The drivers don't want to wait for a customer to pick up. That's wasted time they don't get paid for. The customers don't want to wait for the car. The customers don't want to pay too much. So it's 4 points, right? And the drivers want to pay as much as possible. And you got to balance those things. And it's gotten actually bad on all of these different axes. So I think the starting point simply got to be, can you coordinate people? We're talking DAOs here, right? Can we coordinate people, drivers and riders, to switch to a system where the outcome is more optimal for them? That is all. That is the big question of this. Well, it's the big question, and then I'll give you. It's the big question now. Because first we had to figure out, can you decentralize? How does it work? Can you comply with the regulation? Can you be safe? Can you be trustworthy? Can you handle the payments? Can you deal with, all the different regulations that come in, like both on the payment side and everything else? And we solved that already, right? So we're at this point. The only remaining question is essentially, can you coordinate the drivers and riders to switch? And I think Yes, we're going to demonstrate that very early next year. So very exciting time for us right now.
Everything you say is really, really awesome, and I can imagine so many markets around the world having issues with such transition from, you know, the traditional taxi model licensed by the state versus open competition with anybody having a vehicle. For sure, there is a more balanced approach. But what I really want to concentrate our conversation on is the governance aspect. Like I've read, I did my homework about the decentralized ride sharing marketplace, which is governed by the TRIP protocol, if I'm correct.
You're absolutely right. So we a lot of thinking this through was also thinking through how would you do this? Like, how would you build a decentralized rideshare network? You have to work forward and you have to work backward and forward again. Any software developer, knows that's how it works. You can't just, the waterfall model doesn't work. So first you kind of need to think about what is the end state you want. The end state we wanted was a system that is fairer for the drivers and the riders. It's not even, if it doesn't have governance, great. Maybe you don't need governance. Turns out you do need governance, so I can get into that, why this is relevant here. Similarly, if you don't need a token, well, I don't think you should have a token. If you don't need crypto, you shouldn't use crypto. You see my point, right? You need to start with the users. You need to, like, for consumer applications, and they think crypto, people have to learn that. You can't start with, I want to use crypto. That's not where I started. I started with, people have tried other approaches, right? We have several different rideshare companies. If Lyft was in charge, Lyft is a $4 billion company right now. Uber is a $114 billion company. But just let's say you wave a magic wand and you put Lyft in charge, the situation for drivers is not going to be it's not going to improve, right? It's almost like the term revolution.
Just someone else taking advantage of them.
Yes. The term revolution comes from, well, for one, turning a wheel. It's just someone else is in charge, right? To break the wheel, you actually need to do something like decentralization. I think that's the key insight of Satoshi. That's the key insight that we're seeing repeatedly. And by the way, we're seeing this even with the current OpenAI drama a little bit. Like Andrej Karpathy, actually, one tweet after, Sam was back in charge after all these, Andrej actually tweeted, thinking a lot about centralization and decentralization right now. So this is the founding fathers in the United States, and I know they inspired a lot of other countries, right? We probably have much better functioning democracy in Europe because of, the American Revolution and, the system of governance that was pioneered. Well, I was going to say over there, but I'm here now. So
it was improved. Let's put it that way. It was improved.
It was improved, but not just in America, but globally. And I think this is the same thing. It's just the same tradition of thought. Maybe you need to find a way to handle governance in such a way that you don't put a single entity in charge. It's just too dangerous. No one should have the one ring. If you give the ring from Gollum in Lord of the Rings, if you give it to Gandalf, the situation is not improved because even Gandalf gets corrupted by the one ring. And I think it's a good analogy because, I personally feel quite happy with Elon being in charge with Twitter. On the flip side, there's a lot of stuff he does that I disagree with, right? Like he's censoring, he's saying you can't post about competitors. So you're seeing, if Elon is a little bit of Gandalf, well, even Gandalf shouldn't have the one ring for Twitter. I think Lyft shouldn't have the one ring that Uber currently has in the United States. We need a better solution. And that's, well, we're on a governance podcast here. So how do you do that? How do you innovate in governance?
You touched upon, you said something which I want to take you back. You said if you don't need crypto, don't do crypto. If you don't need governance, don't do governance. My question is, do you need a token for governance? Does governance equal crypto? Does governance equal token? How do you approach this?
I don't think you necessarily need it in all situations. I'm talking very general here. I do think you're still going to get some form of governance on some level somewhere, right? And it's a question: is that good enough for your goal? Put it this way: there's no token involved with the World Wide Web. There's no formal governance on the protocol level by the World Wide Web, but there is the World W3C consortium, which publishes, documentation on, like HTTP2, HTTP3, protocols like that. Similarly, you have standards on email with, sender permitted from, which decides, who gets to email, DKIM, and, like DMARC and all these different standards from deliverability, where they're dealing with spam and blacklisting. So what I'm saying is the email protocol natively doesn't have any governance, but then you have these layers of blacklists and permission systems. And right now that works quite nice-ish. It's a little bit harder for smaller players in the email system to actually deliver emails effectively. So you're kind of running into this. But you could very well see something like email go rogue, right? Where the power centralizes too fast into the hands of the people controlling the blacklists, and suddenly you have an almost centralized system again. So even if you don't have governance in your protocol, you have governance in your protocol. That's what I'm getting into. The question is just, how do you handle it? And so
exactly, does governance mean crypto? Does governance mean tokens?
Not necessarily, as we're seeing there, but even OpenAI, right? You always have, as you see with OpenAI, just now the employees actually in this case had more power.
Yeah, but I don't see this as effective governance. Yes, this happens when extremes, when the shit really hits the fan. But on in other everyday situations that are not as extreme, you don't see this kind of response from the world participants.
Well, here's the thing. I think if you don't think about governance thinks about you. That's what's happening, right? So what I'm getting at is, if you have a badly governed or this governance that is not designed to be effective, that doesn't anticipate what happens, then you're going to get makeshift solutions and revolutions and coups. And, this happens on the level of governments as well. If the governance doesn't work well, then you might get a coup. And sometimes you get lucky, but most of the time you get actually very unlucky, and it's far worse after the coup than before. Also, you get instability because external players, it's actually, if you think governance is a set of, how do you govern something? You have a set of rules. I think similar, the code sometimes is part of the governance on the crypto side, and then you get issues because if the code has a bug, then you get someone external exploiting you. Well, the same thing actually happens with governments. If your governance is not effective enough, then you might have external entities facilitating a coup. So what I'm getting is, you can't escape governance. Anything that is valuable and that is aligning incentives between people inherently gets governance. So anyway, where we approached this from was, I just didn't want to jump to the solution. I wanted to solve a problem. I realized we don't have decentralized marketplaces. Obviously, we're here on the podcast. I'll be straight up that the best solution we found is utilizing the innovations that came out of the cryptocurrency and crypto governance space. I don't think we have all the answers in this space at all. And, I've been in this space since at least 2011, kind of longer, because I've tried to work on reputation currencies back in 2003. I've been thinking about these kind of problems for a long while. And I don't think we have all the best answers, but I'll tell you why I think governance is so important for something like a marketplace. A marketplace runs on trust. When I call a car, I don't have the mental capacity to think about levels of safety, trust, all of those things. I need a standard. That standard needs to be very high. It needs to be enforced. I want the driver to be background checked. I want, if there's something wrong, I want the legal recourse. Put just in the shoes of a normal user, right? I'm sure, some of the listeners are going to be, different from that. Personally, I'm not. Honestly, I'm 100% in the shoes of the normal person. I don't want to think about any of this. I want my stuff to just work. And for that to work, there needs to be standards. Those standards need to be enforced. I think we have good standards for like interacting with local regulators. I want a system that is background checks, interaction with the police, legal recourse, everything needs to be as good, or ideally, and that's what I'm really aiming for, better than what already exists. No one needs to think about it. Similarly, payment side, people don't want to learn something new. They don't want to go through conversion. If they can use a credit card, they want to use a credit card. So that's the goal for us. No extra steps. But how do we get that done? How do we get governance done on a decentralized marketplace without a centralized entity? Well, you have to decouple different parts, but you still need a permitting process of sorts. And so our solution is essentially at the top of it is what we call the marketplace itself. You might call it a DAO, but our users, we just call it the Rideshare marketplace. It's a set of smart contracts, or, in the Solana lingo, programs that govern the whole thing, keep it together, provide services, and ensure that different parts of the network can work together. Once that governance is turned on, and we think it should be governed, and I'll get into why. I think it should be governed very straightforward with governance tokens. I mean, it's the obvious solution for one. It's the best researched solution. It's what works. That's the first part. It should be governed by something. There's a separate question of who should actually have those tokens, but you need governance of sorts. The second part is, I think, the day-to-day operations can't really be run by like a vote going to normal people. They don't have the capacity, especially when you want broad participation. So in my opinion, and this is, when we turn things on, not going to be completely in my hands, because there's going to be a vote, and, I only have some voting power, but not enough to actually make that happen, which is the essence of governance that is decentralized. It's not like we can make proposals, but we can't actually make sure those proposals pass. You can forge alliances, you can talk, you can make arguments, but in the end, the vote is the vote. I think the way we see this at that point is delegating some authority in a revocable way to what we call compliance auditors. Compliance auditors are a set of mostly probably legal firms. They don't have to be, but they have the capacity of evaluating if what we call operators, those are the local entities that are fitting into the legal responsibility of providing rideshare services, to verify, that the people involved in running those companies are background checked, safe, that the company is properly incorporated, that it is not, delinquent in some form on its debts, that it has a local license, that it has insurance, that it complies with all the local law, that it can handle customer support. Not an easy job, but it's also not crazy. That's just day-to-day transactions like that are done. And then it's a multi-sig of basically saying, we approve operator so-and-so to do its job. We approve verifier so-and-so to do its job. A verifier is essentially a service that does things like phone number verification. You use this every time you get to an app. They send you a text message, you reply, or, you verify your identity card and they confirm. In our case, the verifier, however, creates a signature that can then be used to prove to any operator within the jurisdiction that the verifier is allowed to approve for, that the identity of this person has been approved. It's a bunch of public key cryptography involved. So now that is the layer of governance. You kind of go down, and then you're the verifier then verifies drivers and riders. And so you have every entity on the network kind of receiving some authority and permission on the network from the main governance that actually all of these different entities have a stake in voting in. So governance is hard here. Then on the flip side, you still got to keep in mind most people will not really, no one's really excited, except for some policy wonks, no one's really excited about voting. No one's excited about governance, only when they need it, right? Only when things get really, really bad, So that's the challenge: is design a system that allows for exit and voice, but don't assume that people will come to the network because they can vote. They won't. They want the network to just work. So lots of difficult challenges in governance design.
I want to try to sum up where we are right now. So what you're trying to plan and what you're designing is a combination of a social and a protocol DAO, the marketplace. So the governance is a hybrid of both social aspects but also protocol aspects. So you don't have to rely on the people and the verifiers, as you say, to keep voting and in turn have to face voting apathy at some point. But I want to ask, what's the level of decentralization that you're aiming to have from the get-go, from day one, once you release the Teleport out to the wild?
So it's coming in stages, and I think this is gonna be. I think it's gonna be a role model for people. I mean, there will be other, or rather, I think there will be other models, but I think it's a model that people will look at and think about copying, because I think it's a good model. So our view on this is Teleport is a client for the Rideshare protocol, just like Chrome is a client for the World Wide Web, or Google Mail or Outlook are clients for email. So Teleport itself is not a rideshare provider. It's not a rideshare company. It's just a client, right? So just like eBay is a marketplace or Best Buy is an online shop, Chrome is not an online shop. It's just a client that can connect to an online shop. So we have rideshare operators. They actually do ride sharing. And we have mobile applications like Teleport that just connect to a rideshare application. So we had to think about this in the way, well, if we want to build the entire system, we have to build at least an example of every part, right? If you wanted to start, let's say no one's ever made a web browser, no one's ever made a web server, you got to kind of write both of them at the same time. How do you test your web browser if there's no web server? How do you test it in the real world if there's no operating company? So we can start, we have a subsidiary, we have a development corporation at first, that's the Decentralized Engineering Corporation. Below, we have a company that builds the Teleport app. Below, we have a company that's operating rideshare servers and rideshare operators. And initially, we can operate this because we're compliant with all the rules and regulations in just the way like a normal rideshare company would, even though we have this separation between the different entities that a normal company wouldn't do. We can just operate this as a company. Now, the moment we turn on the governance for the rideshare protocol, that governance is already going to be token-based. From there on, it is making proposals to the rideshare protocol governance to turn on things like the compliance auditors are one of the first things we are going to need, right? Because the compliance auditors are the only ones who can basically check that an operator and a verifier are actually capable and legally allowed to do their job. So once we have operators and verifiers, the next step afterwards is onboarding drivers and riders through the process of these. And then the challenge that remains here is operators, verifiers, and drivers, riders should have a say in the governance. So how do you actually get that say into the governance to them? And that's where proof of revenue on our network comes in. We think if just people create these roles or invite each other, all those things, that's very easy to fake. You can just do lots of fake invites. Anyone who's ever run any kind of referral program, and I mean like very classical Web 2,
for sure, yeah.
They try to game it.
It gets spammed to oblivion, yeah.
So the solution here is the network that is at that point already decentralized essentially gives tokens at that point. And there's a few intermediate steps that I'm skipping. But, this is like after several steps of decentralization.
There is an initial distribution of governance token, though. Let's not go to the further stage. Let's stay in the beginning. there is an initial distribution of governance tokens. How are they normal SPL tokens?
That is the current plan. Like until we issue that, everything here is, like a hypothetical. But yes, we think that the most developed, capable technology for doing governance on a marketplace like this, with all the needs that we have, just a normal SPL governance, just a normal token.
So it's a normal SPL governance. It's a normal SPL token used for governance. What's the initial distribution plan? I'm not asking for numbers. I'm like, how does this? Which parties are you going to invite first in order to distribute? There needs to be some to start somewhere from.
Yes. So the way we see this is initially, if the idea of the protocol is to essentially give the people building the network by doing work to build the network, a say in the governance that includes the builders of the software, that includes the drivers and riders, that includes the operators, that includes the verifiers. So basically, the first step is essentially early backers team and foundation, because those are the entities involved before the network really, turns on and is capable of, to a significant degree, giving additional governance to drivers, riders, because all of that just plays out over time. That just takes a little bit. We are 2.5 years in. So initial goal here is to basically, instead of having a company, which is the stage we're in right now, doing the governance, to instead have the early backers and team as and foundation as kind of like a set of entities that are separate and distinct from the initial development corporation, right? That's the first step for decentralization. And that's purely for the purpose of governance.
How do you determine the level of governance power that these different groups you mentioned are going to be receiving? Who is going to be more powerful? Who's going to have the biggest voice in the governance? And do we need for a different power levels of power in the start? Because regardless of the initial distribution, at some point this is going to vary depending on the circulation and the internal economy of the whole ecosystem that you're building. So who's going to be the one that decides, and who's going to be the one that gets to vote on what the protocol does next?
The way we approach this is, this was also taking a little bit of thoughtfulness. We didn't start at the beginning. Again, we didn't even start with saying we are going to do a token. We did not. We told this to everyone, who got involved in working on this. We're going to figure out what's best. And the way we do this for everything, both the rideshare portion and otherwise, is we use modeling and simulation. So we're using Julia, which is a scientific computing language that is really good for agent-based models. It's a high-performance computing system to essentially simulate that situation. And the development corporation's purpose is to essentially provide these answers. So we've run simulations and simulation notebooks without end for quite a while now to arrive at what we think is a good starting point. The goal for us is to basically set the foundation for then moving more of the governance in stages towards drivers and riders, with the majority of governance moving mostly to drivers, riders, and those who invite them. But that is it's a process that requires stages, meaning you in the initial setup, that is basically determined by the team. And with the team, I actually mean not some random person, but that is heavy internal discussion based on code. The code in this case is simulation code, economic simulation code. So I do think there is a rational approach to designing governance, and I don't think it can just be feeling based. I'll give you a different example that might be a little bit like easier to understand, because it's the same methodicalness that gets us there as we're doing on the governance side. we need to build atomic networks in every city we go in. An atomic network means enough drivers and enough riders that the idle time of the drivers is low. That means enough customers. And the wait time for the customers is low because they're not going to wait 20 minutes for a car. They're going to wait 3 to 5 minutes tops. So there's a certain number where that happens. That is specific to the geographic structure, like meaning population density, population centers. Some places are very spread out with suburbs, but most of the traffic actually happens downtown. Then, what's the average speed? What are the traffic patterns? In the morning, people come from the suburbs and go to work in downtown. Then they come back. So what we do is we download a map from OpenStreetMap. We've at this point got this fairly automated. Download a map from OpenStreetMap for the region we're looking at. Then we take census data on census tracts, and there's other data sources, but that's a very obvious one, and look at the population density. And then we're spawning drivers and riders based on the data we have, and we simulate pickups and drop-offs. And with that, we can tweak. We have an optimization problem now. What's the minimum amount of drivers, the minimum amount of riders to provide the quality of service that we want to give? That is our minimum atomic network, right? So we have a rational approach to designing. If we can get this many people, we can turn the city on and people will have a good experience until there's either too much, like if we have the minimum set, right? Let's say we don't immediately drop below the minimum. That's not a guarantee, obviously, but let's say we don't drop below the minimum immediately. Instead, either supply or demand start outstripping each other. Then the question becomes if you have too much supply, how can you get more demand? If you have too much demand, how can you get more supply, or at least use pricing or surge pricing to induce more demand? All of that can be simulated ahead of time. It's obviously not as good as the real world, and no plan survives contact with the real world, but it's probably better to make a plan than not make a plan. We're doing exactly the same thing on the governance side. We're starting with a goal of reaching a decentralization. Initially, the only entities, give them a few other constraints. We don't want the token to be seen as a speculative thing. We want to have it be seen as a governance.
I'm really interested in that part. But before we go to that side, because I'm going to ask about speculation and how this kind of kills the balance between what you're building. But before we go there, are you building your own governance protocol, or you're using something that already exists on Solana?
I think it will be a mixture. It will be a hybrid. It always will be. So like we are not afraid of code, of writing code. And as I said, at the very beginning, tech is not the problem. Knowing what to build, that is the challenge. Tech is not the problem. The stuff works now. We can, I don't think I think the listeners of this podcast might care more, but most users have never heard about SPL governance. What I'm getting at is we will use the tools that work for us. And I'll give you a little anecdote of why I say, tech is, it's just, I guess I'm an unusual crypto founder because I'm not quite a crypto founder, right? I don't come from the side of I want to use crypto. I come from the side of I want to solve user problems. When I was at Dropbox, I was employee 11 over there. We were considering to use a certain protocol, but it's called Bonjour or MDNS, and also MQTT. And we looked at all these different protocols. We ended up making something custom, which is an odd decision, but several years later, it works very well. It's still the protocol that is used. The protocol that I signed back then is still the protocol that is used by all desktop Linux, Windows, Mac, Dropbox clients to communicate with each other. Similarly, when the macOS Finder, for example, didn't have an API for making context menus or making little icon overlays, other people in the team at Dropbox, they literally just injected code into the running binary by Apple to add a new API into a program that's not open source. They just found a way to inject it. And Apple actually reached out to Dropbox and was like, how do you do that? We want to do that too, because their own engineers couldn't do what the people at Dropbox did. What I'm getting at, tech is not the issue here, right? The question is really, what are the goals you want to achieve for your users?
I totally agree on the viewpoint. At the same time, because SPL governance and realms is a public good and is something that is developed in order to cater towards startups and applications that maybe are not going to code the next SPL governance, or they just want to use certain features, and combining and working together with SPL governance and realms in general is what gives direction. Yep. And you don't need to become an expert in creating DAOs in order to help create tools that will cater to Teleport. So I think you should definitely look at SPL governance, and the listeners of this podcast are really deep into SPL governance.
Oh and no, we want to use SPL governance. I think for me the framing is, I'm never going to commit to like using a specific tool, right? Like we right now are developing everything based on SPL governance, and we have received enormous support from this community. I love it. But for me, the question is more like, how do I achieve my goals, right? I don't think there's any reason to reinvent the wheel, especially with open source. If anything, I would love to take a strong stance where, half a year from now, we have several people employed who work on SPL governance to actually make it better. So everything that we need, other people probably need too, and then we can all use the same standard tooling. That is the goal here.
I love the goal, and I really like the fact that you bounded it into a year, and that would be amazing to be part of the higher DAO that kind of governs the actual SPL governance protocol. But let's go to the subject I stopped you from opening, which was speculation and governance tokens. And speculation governance tokens, where they are also sharing the same token standard, which is SPL token, standard token, permissionless. I can take any token, create any market, any liquidity pool, create derivatives on derivatives on derivatives, and drive everything into, let's put it, tail risk exposure or degen conditions in our world. How would you combat this situation?
I think it's that's a tough one. I think I'm coming more from the side of, I'm aware of DeFi. I'm not a trader myself. I'm not someone who checks, like I don't own, much of anything. Like crypto is not a huge part of my portfolio. So I'm a little bit of an odd founder. I like solving in the space. Again, a lot of my investors are marketplace people. We want to solve a problem for our users, which include crypto people, because I think in the future, everyone's going to use crypto. I think tools like USDC and Circle are going to, bring crypto. It's just the best way. It's going to replace Venmo. It can create a new payment standard. But for that, you need to actually put that in the hands of people. So that's my starting point. I think the speculation is, it exists. It's not my world. What I want to do is I want to find a solution. I realize for a marketplace, you need governance. For governance to work, and for governance to be fair and representative of the people actually operating on the network, you need to give the governance to the people actually doing the work. We came up with a fantastic way to do that, which is the people actually bringing revenue to the network by operating, driving, writing, verifying. We found a way. It's multi-stage. It's not immediate. It's, it depends on the governance of the network to actually turn on these mechanisms. We want to give that to people. I think there's ways you can kind of like reduce the amount of, we don't have any intentions right now, like, to be involved with anything related to any listings, pricing. We just don't. We're treating it as it doesn't have value.
Yeah, the problem is that you're not in control of that. You know, I had a previous startup which I had the same issue. We said, we are not a speculative token. We have nothing to do with DeFi's or with, there's nothing. It's just a utility token. This didn't stop people from creating liquidity pools, didn't stop people from creating markets. And that can be a problem. Like having the classic token standard can be a problem. What I'm going, like, having this conversation, I can't help but have different ideas. I would urge you to look at the new token standards. Look at the new Solana token standards. They're very, very interesting. You have soul-bound tokens, which, as you said, they're not. They're permissioned tokens. You have tokens that cannot leave accounts. There are some really cool developments that you could definitely. They're very new. They're brand new. I wouldn't blame anybody for not knowing these things.
I've seen some of it. I honestly don't think it's a big problem. People can do whatever they want. I think the important thing for me is, we are doing a fair. We're creating a protocol. We're decentralizing the governance to the point where it is decentralized, and then it successively becomes more decentralized by essentially having a at least 7 year, it could be far longer depending on governance votes, issuance of essentially the power to the people actually doing the work. Like, I think that's the part for me. And then, the question is, do people really want that or not? My view is, if Rideshare is, as big as, well, it is very, very big. I think the people, especially the people working in the space, it will be interesting to them. But put it this way, I don't think Satoshi made no claims, that Bitcoin is something that, people should want or shouldn't want. People can figure out for themselves if they want something, right? It's not, you don't need to, you don't need to answer these questions for other people. People can think for themselves what they want to do, how they want to interact with things. My goal is simply to make sure that we create a standard for how to build decentralized marketplaces that works and empowers the drivers and riders. Because if that is true, the same thing can be done for food delivery. The same thing can be done for car rental marketplaces like Turo. There's it can be done for things like Indiegogo and Kickstarter. It can be done for with slight variation. We can really start thinking about what does it take to break network effects from large monopolists to something that is better for the users involved. And so I think sticking to the side of how does this function, and then letting the governance of the network actually, decide how to because we're talking about something that is, put it this way, if you can get Rideshare out of the hands of monopolies that essentially extract 40% plus from local economies, from drivers, from the people locally working, from the customers, that is money that is taken out of local economies and wrecking local economies. So is it valuable to make this market more efficient on a societal level? Dramatically so, right? So what I'm getting at is, this is a classical entrepreneurial use case. You take an inefficient market, you make it more efficient. That's what I want to do. On the side of how do people then vote on top of this? How do people handle and take custody of their own tokens, and what do they do with them? I don't control that. It's a decentralized system.
Yeah, but in order to be successful, and any experiment like that to be successful, I think that you cannot have open market conditions and speculation affecting efficient governance just because someone wants to speculate on the token. I just feel, in my mind, those two trains are completely going the opposite direction. I'm really curious to see how Teleport will balance this, and the effective and efficient governance is really far away from just governance. Just governance at the moment is very, very easy. You have so many different ways. You have tokenless governances still based on blockchain. You have tokens, NFTs, combinations. You have weights. You have reputation models. There are so many places. But still, I am not sure we've cracked the safe with efficient and effective governance that encourages participation, does not induce fatigue to the voters, apathy to the voters, and still rewards them. So effective and efficient, not there yet. Governance, I'm with you. We're there.
Well, you know what's interesting is I'll give you another example. I think it's actually friends of mine work on this system called Blue Sky, and Blue Sky is basically, like it's Twitter redesigned is a decentralized system. There's also Farcaster, who's like another friend is working on that. It's different approaches to the same thing. Some more blockchainy. The other one's still using like Merkle trees, just in a different ways. And you still get different levels of governance. So like, put it this way, Blue Sky is as if you took Twitter, which had multiple data centers when Elon took it over, and you made it possible, instead of just Twitter being able to have 1, 2, 3, opening a fourth data center that all replicate data between each other. What if any person in the world could open a new data center for the Twitter network and then make a peering contract with another party to send the data along? But because of like how the proofs or how the tree structure of the network works, being able to verify, both because of the signatures, that the data is authentic, right? So now you buy the data and you can scale from 4 to 50 to 100 data centers that are not run by the same entity. Well, you still have governance, right? Because individual parts might actually try to censor, but because the users are transferable, now you have a governance. But it's a weird governance. It's different governance, but it is still a form of governance. Same thing as I said about email. Well, I know it's not standard, but you had this at OpenAI, and it goes a little bit into a touchy subject of labor law and unions. And, I'm not but these things have been obvious to people for a while, that actually, the workers also have power. I don't think, it's always the best thing if for the state to give special rights here. As OpenAI has showed, you actually don't need that. They can actually, coordinate in specific circumstances for themselves. Similarly, I think it would actually hurt the workers if you tried to, create, if the government was in charge making sure that Uber's drivers get fair pay, it would actually get worse for everyone. What you need is actually fair market competition where the drivers can switch away. So what I'm saying is, voice and exit, like several layers. You have different operators to compete with each other. You have the ability to, in theory, fork the network. So the governance doesn't only come down to SPL governance. It does, and we want to use it, but it doesn't only come down to that. It's the whole setup of making sure. Similarly, there's the miners on something like Bitcoin, or the validators if you take like Ethereum or Solana. But then if you think about it, if there was ever a fork of the Solana network and USDC becomes very big on Solana, it means that a single entity controlling that centralized token actually has a lot of leverage in picking which one is the real one, because they can decide if there was ever a fork. So what I'm saying is, governance is never easy. It's multiple layers. There's always power centers accumulating somewhere, and then the different power centers need to negotiate with each other. We're just trying to give a little bit more, well, actually quite a lot, like the vast majority of one of these entities, which is the voting power on the network, to drivers and riders. That's the goal here. Clearly, governance has many more layers than that in a system like ours, where The drivers can't operate without the operators. The operators don't have any. The drivers can blacklist the operators, by the way, right? So if you have 3 operators in your city and one of them, similarly, you have feedback mechanisms, right? If the operators give you an ETA, an estimated time of arrival, and they say car is here in 3 minutes, the other one says here in 7 minutes, but the guy who said 3 minutes is consistently wrong, you can actually use on-chain reputation to basically, impose a higher fee on that one. So he's no longer price competitive if he keeps giving wrong timing estimates. So many layers of governance here. I do think I think our approach is right to keep it simple as possible, and then be very careful and conservative. And with we at that point, I mean actually the governance of the network in upgrading the system. Going too complicated and complex at the start, I think is more likely to doom the network than just doing the simple and obvious thing and then improving it in very, very careful, deliberative processes using these models that we're going to open source. We haven't open sourced yet, but we're going to open source our Julia models with which you can kind of, play through why and how we should design the governance like this.
What about the side of the customers, where the customers are rating the drivers are rating the customers, and vice versa? Do you think there is any value of such a reputation model being on chain and using other outside elements, maybe some kind of social validators in a way, in order to help build such an on-chain reputation model that could be imported, from different operators around the world? Or do you think is there part of your roadmap? Is it not? Is it valuable? Is it not? What do you think?
No, it is valuable. It's actually, so it's interesting. We have like multiple parts. So first off, we have the attestation system, which is a fancy word for, making it provable off-chain and on-chain that someone checked basically your driver's license, or, inspected your vehicle. Like, I need a proof of that. I need a signature. That's one part. We need reputation. Reputation is, if you think about it, yes, it is absolutely vital to the system, but there's different ways to accomplish it. And it is not, you can put a portion of it, we have not woven it together in such a way, meaning the operators and the clients, well, initially they're going to use whatever we implement because we make the first version, but right now it's not woven together. What I mean with woven together, at some point you can basically say, well, maybe you give better prices to people who have better ratings. Again, I don't want to make the decision. I think that's where the governance comes in to vote on such proposals. I think partially on-chain makes sense. I think one of my big concerns with everything is privacy. And just simply because people have been very, blockchain is very, very open so far. You can see all the transactions. You can see all the votes. I think that makes people on some level comfortable with it because it's just, harder to abuse. I think what we're going to see with mainstream adoption is actually the pendulum is going to swing the other way, and people are going to say, oh, blockchain is so open, it's bad for consumers, there's too much data leaking. So in the design of the Rideshare protocol, we made it very clear, we don't want where you're picked off and where you're delivered to on chain, for example. That needs to be private, right? A lot of things need to be private. I think voting on the network should be private, and I really, I know there's some efforts to make that happen, but I just think it's absurd. We know this from all the democracies that confidential voting is really important because otherwise people don't feel comfortable voting how they really believe. So I think that's key. And in terms of reputation, I don't think you want your reputation accessible by others unless you permit them to do so. I think so. The approach here is going to have to be something like something zero knowledge based, where you're using your history of all the transactions, and you can use that to prove that your score is, let's say, above 4.9. So you want to be able to prove your reputation without revealing it and without having it stored on chain unless you choose to reveal it. So I think important scoping issue here is there's much easier ways to achieve the initial goals of reputation. But I think once we see real use, we will be very quick. I mean, we're going to have to hire a team as large as our entire current team is probably only to work on reputation. We'll have to have a team just like that, just on like the verification side, right? So the more you think about it, you're realizing this is the opportunity to build an entry for millions, hundreds of millions of people into the crypto ecosystem, and all the tech we're developing and spinning out will be reusable by others. Just like we're going to share, like the governance tech with others who need governance. We need that on the reputation side, and we need it on the identity side. And like, we don't intend to keep that standalone to the Rideshare protocol. That would be stupid. We want to open source it, release it, and work with other open source developers in making it usable for as many projects as possible.
Since we're already past the 1 hour mark, give us a little bit of what should we expect to see from Teleport, from the Trip network in the coming year, months? What is a short-term plan, a long-term plan? Maybe next breakpoint we can use the app?
Next breakpoint you can use the app. You can use it.
I mean, it's going to be Singapore. It's going to be very tidy. Everything's going to be tidy and neat. So maybe that's a good place to get it running.
You're going to definitely be able to use it in the US. I do think as a stretch goal, Singapore, I think there's a good chance we can make that work. And I'll tell you why. So basically the roadmap is this. Next, we're going to release the Trip Explorer. That's kind of like, like a Solana Explorer. And I know that our Solana dashboard, there's several. I'm not going to, say any specific ones because they're all good. I've used a lot of different ones. They're all awesome. But it's a dashboard where you can see a map of the places where there are licensed operators. Right now, that's Florida and Texas. We have several more in the United States coming. It's very attractive to launch something like this in the US because the regulation is very established. It's easy to understand. It uses a single currency. It's a very large market. So it's just like if we had to support many different regulations in many different places, that would be much harder. There is state level regulation that differs, but fundamentally, there's a lot of homogeneity between the different places in the US. It's very similar regulatory regimes, of course, because they collaborated with each other. So that's good for us. That makes it really easy to launch in the US. So we have Texas and Florida as two of the largest states in the US, so larger than most countries. It's over 50 million people that are already in areas where we're permitted to operate. We're going to put that on an Explorer dashboard. The next step is then taking these agent-based models I've mentioned, putting them into this dashboard and showing people what are the unlock conditions. And what I mean with that is for a city like Austin, it might be around, and we'll have the final numbers, but it might be as little as 30 drivers to actually start having an okay experience, maybe 50 drivers to have a really good experience. And then, enough riders, because the drivers are going to fizzle out unless you have enough drivers at the same time. Enough riders. Unless there's a supply and demand balance, people are going to get bored because they're not going to get matched. So we need both. And we're going to show these unlock thresholds and give people tools to coordinate to unlock their local city. And then once the city unlocks, people can actually already start taking the rides. And from there, it is taking incremental additional steps to actually make sure that the people who do take those rides are, eventually, and that again is pending governance votes that are not under my control the moment we reach decentralization, but pending that governance to make it possible for drivers, riders, operators, verifiers to get involved in the governance of the protocol. So that's our roadmap, and it's going to go faster than you think because we have the licenses, we have the app, we're going to launch the Explorer, and then we need to work with local people who are excited about this to reach our critical mass. The moment that happens, the first place goes online, and then the moment we can actually start handing out network rewards, those network rewards will go the protocol we issue at that point in a decentralized fashion, network rewards to those people who do the most work on the network. And from the start, drivers will earn more, riders will pay less, early adopters, the moment, that can be voted on, early adopters will get rewarded with governance.
So slowly unveiling in the US and then moving towards the rest of the world.
That is correct. The moment we can, one of the largest parts there is just engineering resources. It's a lot of work to support, multiple currencies, multiple stable coins. You need to be very deliberate. There's a whole process to, do the research, design it, challenge it, make an implementation plan, spec tickets. Software development is hard work for anyone who's ever written software, right?
It is at the same time lots of, because we've gone through lots of developer teams. There are the go-to-market strategy is important. To make it attractive to users, and we've been in many situations where we've thought, too many dApps, not enough users. And
that's why we start with one market. You verify, and then you expand. I think it would be absolutely insane to try to go global before you got we have Texas and Florida. We're going to add we have about 11 more licenses in the US in process. So we'll have plenty to do in the US. But the moment we're seeing that the US works, of course, it starts to make sense to start investing globally. The same thing is true for, we have a fairly active community now. We have a lot of requested features. And I'm just oh God, I want to do all those things, but step by step.
This has been a lot to unpack, a great conversation, an amazing trip, pun intended, that lies ahead of us. Love the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us, Paul. I really enjoyed that, and there's a lot to see from Teleport, and we're really looking forward to your next releases, your next announcements. And
guys,
we should chat again soon.
I really enjoyed this. Your questions were fire, really, really thoughtful. And thank you so much for inviting me. This was really fun.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. And let's keep on building on the Solana ecosystem. It's only possible in Solana. Here, I even had my Solana glasses here to close it. Let's go. It's only possible in Solana. Thank you so much, man. Thank you so much.
Only possible in Solana. Let's build.
Thank you. Enjoy and best of luck. We'll be watching.
Thank you. See you guys.